Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it around me and behind me. Now, today's video is going to be slightly different. I'll bring up some example plants as we go along, but the topic I want to dive into today might be a bit of a controversial one. I'm probably going to get some flack in the comments down below, but I do encourage that. Let's have a healthy conversation down below. But today I want to talk about the different genuses of plants and also some that might be claimed by what you're seeing in some plant nurseries and plant shops as, go ahead, get it. This is a relatively easy houseplant for you to take care of, especially as your first houseplant. The people that have been here a while might know where this is going. Now, what I want to do, I don't want to poo-poo on all the different genuses of plants. What I'm going to do to keep it equal is I'm going to talk about at least my opinions as to what plants are probably not the best beginner or quote-unquote easy plants to get started with, especially if you're kind of slowly growing your collection and it's not quite at the crazy levels of mine. But also I want to balance it out and say, okay, if you do want to get some of these easy but not so easy houseplants, really, these would potentially be the ones that I would suggest because they tend to be the most forgiving. And then on the flip side of that, when I talk about the genuses that I do think are actually relatively forgiving and relatively easy to get started with, I'll give a couple of examples of maybe a specific species within each that isn't as easy as you might think, and maybe not it's not going to be a good option for you to have as your first plant. Now, let's dive into it. Hopefully that made sense and I wasn't just prattling along there. But the first one I want to talk about, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise for anybody, I want to talk about Calatheas, or prayer plants, or Stramanthes, or Tenanthes, Marantas. Don't think I'm forgetting anything. Calatheas, Stramanthes, Tenanthes, the Marantas. Yeah, so those be the ones. Let me pick up an example one, just so I've got one so you can see a version of what I'm talking about. So prayer plants are the types of plants that everybody, including myself, and I'm pretty sure most everybody else, when they first start kind of getting into house plants or tropical plants indoors a bit more seriously, they're the ones that a lot of people will gravitate towards. And it makes sense because they've got beautiful, beautiful foliage. Usually there's a lot of patterning. I'm trying to see if I can bring up an example here of a leaf that has got some of the purple backs as well. And you might be able to see if I kind of move my hand over, you might be able to see that some of these have got some purple backs. They are very, very interesting plants and the ones that people will gravitate towards. They're not the easiest of plants. I'm sorry to burst the bubble on this one. They're not the easiest of plants. And take it from somebody who's been doing this for a few years now, and I'm hoping that some other people might actually back me up in the comments down below. Save yourself some heartache and maybe don't start with this because it will give you a false negative. And by that I mean it might put you off looking into other types of plants because you've not been able to keep a prayer plant happy. And it would be a crying shame because these are not really that easy to take care of. They can be fussy about their water. You can get crispy tips on the leaves because you're not giving it the right type of water. You can get crispy tips on the leaves if the humidity isn't high enough. And then you could also get crispy leaves or curling leaves if you're not watering it enough. And you can get crispy leaves and curling leaves if you've got it too close to too much light. If you're not giving it enough light, you can get yellowing leaves. If the temperature is generally okay as long as it doesn't get too cold, because again, if it gets too cold, you can get cold damage on these. If it gets too dry, these tend to be a spider mite magnet. So all in all, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with this plant. So for the average beginner, I probably wouldn't recommend getting any type of prayer plant. Yes, they're pretty. Yes, they've got the movement at night. But save yourself some heartache. And I think most of us who've been doing this for a while now would probably agree either most of us have got rid of most of our prayer plants. I've still got a couple lurking around. But they are called drama queens for a good reason. They can be beautiful. Do not get me wrong on that one. Some of these have got the most beautiful foliage that you will see in tropical houseplants. But the kind of heartache that goes with it, because you can see something stunningly beautiful that you've got from a plant shop potentially really deteriorate quite quickly in your care. And again, hopefully people might back me up down in the comments below. Even people that have been doing this for years could still end up killing these plants like that relatively easily, or still have them looking a bit crusty, and it's a dingy, dark secret that we keep out of visible view of anybody who might be looking at our collection, because most of the time they're not happy. Now, flip side of that is, if you do definitely want to go for a type of prayer plant, go for the standard Maranta. And I don't think I've got one in here. I'll see if I can find a picture of mine when I first got it and put it here. The standard prayer plant that you will get, and I can't remember what it is called. It's the Maranta leucanera, I think. That one tends to be the hardier out of all of them. You're still going to have to deal with a lot of the issues that we've talked about, but it won't, at least in my experience, it doesn't throw a hissy fit quite as quickly as all the rest do. But let me put this one down and let's move on to the next type of plant. So the next type of plant I want to talk about are things like orchids. Now, I've got Paphipetalum, I think, or Paphiopedilum, I can never pronounce it properly, in front of me, or the Venus slipper, I think is what it's called, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you might be able to see the bloom. Don't get me wrong, stunning bloom. The leaves are a bit uneventful and they're a bit grass-like, and that's the point I want to make. Even if you manage to keep some of these happy, and I know some people struggle with them, I have got another video where I talk about the care that I give most of my orchids, and I will hopefully remember to link it up here, and you can see that in terms of what I do, and I've always been able to keep my orchids happy. These are not plants that I would say are unachievable to get happy, almost like the Calatheas. These ones you can get happy, might take a while and a bit of trial and error and seeing what works for you. But for a lot of people, what they don't always remember, especially because these might be certain things, not this one specifically, but the Phalaenopsis or the moth orchid. And again, I'll see if I can find a picture and put one up here. Those types of plants, people don't always realize that beautiful as the bloom is, you best be liking the foliage, because the foliage is what you're going to be looking at about 80% of the year, especially if you can get it to rebloom. If you can't get it to rebloom, you're going to be looking at the foliage for a very long period of time. And let's be real, with a lot of orchids, not all orchids, with a lot of orchids, the foliage isn't anything to write home about. So something to bear in mind, again, one that people might end up getting thinking, I can do it, and if it doesn't work, it might be a bit disappointing. Now, on the flip side of that, I will say that the orchids that I would say if you want to trial a bit more on, and I'll see if I can find a picture. It is sold in a lot of stores in the UK and I think Europe as a mini Phalaenopsis orchid. I think from the research that I was doing, I don't think it's actually a Phalaenopsis orchid. It might be something else. I'll see if I can find the scientific name and put it underneath the image as well. But that specific orchid, myself and a lot of other people that have got it, is one that will almost always be in bloom. So that's an interesting one, and it's also not as temperamental, I found, as standard Phalaenopsis and other orchids. So one to maybe try if you really desperately want to get into orchids, and it's a good introduction. So let me put this down and let's talk about the next type of plant. Okay, so the next type of plant, I don't even have one to show you in front of me. Hopefully I'll be able to get a picture and put it up in the corner there, but essentially it's nearly all ferns. Any type of fern, that is always going to be a bit of a challenge. And I've got a couple of ferns still. They're in a very specific location in my conservatory with the high humidity that I have in here, and they're getting just the right level of light. They're in self-watering and the humidity level in here, and they're still not happy. This tells you, like, I've almost got got optimal conditions in here that could potentially work well for these types of plants. And even somebody like me who has given them all the right things, they still struggle. The reality for me, and again, this might be an unpopular opinion, I truly think that even with the best intentions, orchids should, not orchids, ferns. Ferns should be left outdoors. Because most ferns, if they're growing outdoors and they're growing happily, they're fantastic. It's the moment that you're trying to bring them in, they struggle with spider mites, they struggle with aphids. I found, wow, the aphids on my ferns. There's an issue with underwatering, there's an issue with overwatering, there's an issue with low humidity, there's an issue with too much humidity, there's an issue with too much light, there's an issue with too little light. This is another one that's very similar to the Calatheas and the prayer plants. Again, some of the ferns are delicate and beautiful, and people really would love to have them in their house. I'm thinking of the maidenhair fern, is beautiful. And there's something that both the ferns and the Calatheas have got in common, and it also makes them less hardy and less forgiving in a household environment, tends to be the fact that they've got very, very thin leaves. So they can't store that much moisture in their leaves, which means that you need to get their watering almost perfect. The difference between the Calatheas and the difference, and I'm pointing because I'm looking at these types of plants in front of me, so I've got some Calatheas there and I've got some ferns down here. The difference between these two plants is the ferns have got very fine hair-like roots, which means that even their roots aren't actually storing any moisture. The Calatheas and some of the prayer plants have got slightly more tuberous and more clunky, chunky roots, so at least in the favor of the Calatheas, they might be able to store some water there. The ferns don't even have that. So, so it is one of those things that, again, a lot of people might be tempted. I don't think a lot of plant stores will say that this is the easiest plant in the world. Even they're quite honest with the fact that it can be quite challenging in a household. Yes, you could have it in a bathroom, but yes, it could still struggle. But as promised at the beginning of the video, one fern, if you did want to try, and this is one that I've had good success with, and I know other people have had good success with, it's still a fern, so it's still going to be difficult in its entirety to take care of, would be, and I think I've got a picture somewhere that I can put up here again, is the bird's nest fern. That is because it's got slightly more succulent leaves, the leaves are more turgid, there's a capacity for it to keep moisture within the leaves. A lot of the times it's also got a waxy cuticle, so it's got that shiny leaf, so it can actually retain some of its moisture. It's not quite as temperamental as the rest of them. I can talk from that one from experience as one of the easiest ones for sure. Again, still a fern. But I think the rabbit's foot fern is another one that could be relatively easy to take care of indoors. I'm not entirely sure on that one, so don't quote me. But yeah, ferns, challenging. Next up, and probably a bit disappointing for a lot of people, Anthuriums with their beautiful, beautiful leaves. And you can get all different types of Anthuriums out there in the market. Granted, some of these more interesting Anthuriums you probably won't find in a lot of stores. Some of them you might. The Veitchii, which I'm holding in front of me, is one that you might start to see a bit more regularly in the stores. You can usually start to see some crystallinums. You can definitely see a clarinervium. But these are plants where, again, the watering needs to be almost perfect. They need to have very, very, very light and airy soil mix, almost more so than any other houseplant that you can get. But they also like to remain evenly moist, so not too wet and not too dry. A lot of them also want to have high levels of humidity, otherwise they'll get crispy. They also don't like too much light because it could burn the leaves or it could bleach the leaves. If you want to have the darker leaves, get them in a lower light situation. Don't give them too little light because then they could fail altogether as well. You're seeing the pattern here as well. And it's a shame because it's quite interesting. A lot of the plants that can be a bit fussier are some of the ones that have got really interesting foliage, and there might be ones that you might want to add to your collection. That's not to say that there aren't some easy and forgiving houseplants out there. that you can add in with some interesting foliage. So what I would say is if you want to get an Antherium and you want to definitely go down that route, an Antherium is one that you can get into and it's less doom and gloom as the Ferns and the Calatheas. You can learn what you need to do with these and they're a bit easier to keep happy after you know what you're doing. But what I would say is start with something like the Calathea, and hopefully I've found an image of my old Calathea. Bit of a secret. Supposedly one of the easiest Anthuriums. I can keep all the difficult ones happy. Couldn't keep the easiest one happy. Because I like difficult things, me. But the Calathea is a good one. Or you can go for, and hopefully this might get picked up. Let me see if I can pick it up. This is just kind of a standard Anthurium where you get the ones that they're being sold because they've got colourful bracts on their inflorescences. So this I think is the flamingo pink or something along those lines. That one was definitely an easier one to take care of and less fussy. But let's move on to the next type. This is one that I'm probably going to get quite a bit of comments on, I think, because this might ruffle a few feathers. Peperomias, in my opinion, not the most straightforward plant, but there is a caveat, I think. So, with a lot of the peperomias, if they've got very, very turgid, succulent leaves, they should be okay, and they might be easy and forgiving for somebody who's, what shall I say, forgetful water, benign neglect. They tend to do quite well. If you're getting this and you are an overcarer or an overwaterer or somebody who really wants to baby the plants, definitely not one for you. For me also, yes, they do have some interesting foliage. I really, really like, and you might be able to see why, I like to see my plants happy and growing big. Peperomias have got a smaller growth habit, so they generally won't get very, very big or very, very tall. They can get a bit bushy, but they will never get particularly tall. Now, the flip side of that is people with small spaces and flats, potentially, this might be one for you. If you don't have an awful lot of space or you don't want to grow anything too big, this might be one for you. I found that they can be a bit temperamental. I gave up on them after quite a while. Humidity is not too bad unless you've got a caparata. And the caparata, I'll see if I can bring an image, an old image of one of my caparatas here. Beautiful, in my opinion, probably one of the most pretty peperomias out there. But they also do need just the right level of watering and a decent level of humidity, and they can get pests like that as well. So, and interestingly enough, for me, I found the moment I got rid of a lot of my peperomias is also the moment where I'm not as interesting to thrips anymore. That might be one for you to think about there. But yeah, for me, it's a no on the peperomias. I don't think they can be forgiving for a certain period of time, but it could be something that will knock your confidence a few months down the line because it seems good, and you think, and you get really confident, you think you're doing everything right, and then all of a sudden it just fails. It's one of those ones that could be a bit underwhelming for the level of what you get and for how much you need to fuss it, even though it's not supposed to be one that you're fussing with. The one peperomia that I might say you might want to give a try to is, and I cannot remember the name of this peperomia. This tells you how much I like peperomias, but I'll put it up here. I think it's like one of the common names is the mini rubber tree, and I think it's because it looks a bit like the rubber plant. But that was one that I found. I have treated it horrendously bad, and it's still kind of going. It's one of the last ones that's left, so that tells you something. Right, let me put this down and let's talk about ones that are actually easy, but then maybe give you an example of maybe one not to start off with. Right, for the people that have been here for a while, this is probably not a surprise, but philodendrons. Most philodendrons tend to be relatively forgiving plants. And pest pressures, no specific pests will be more prone towards them. They don't kind of have a specific type of pest that is more attracted to them, like for instance spider mites tend to love Calatheas, they tend to love alocasias as well. Philodendrons are an equal opportunity pests plants, so less one and more, you can get different types. Their way that they grow in nature obviously will tell you why they're a bit more forgiving. They grow epiphytically on trees a lot of the time. Some of these other plants do as well, but these are fighters. They're fighters in their natural environment, so they will be fighters within your household as well. Watering, as long as you're not keeping them sapping wet all the time, generally speaking, with most philodendrons, you can kind of keep them happy enough that they won't wither and die, as long as it's got a few leaves. I'm not talking about, I've had a lot of lovely followers and subscribers who've kind of told me horror stories of when they got an unrooted chunk to propagate without any leaves on, and those ones can be a bit temperamental. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a plant that's got a few leaves and is a bit more established, the one that you might be buying from a plant store. A lot of the times they can be quite forgiving. Now, this is the Philodendron Malay Gold, or the Golden Goddess, or I think in some places it's also called the Lemon Lime, although there's another philodendron that's also called the Lemon Lime. But one of the philodendrons that I would say maybe isn't as straightforward, and the reality is you probably won't get it in the average plant store, is something like the Philodendron Gigas, and I'll pick it up. So the Philodendron Gigas is a beautiful plant, very slow growing. There will be a review if there isn't already. I'm not sure how these videos this week are going to go out, but spoiler, that is going to be the plant that's going to get reviewed. But with the Gigas, another one as well that I think some people might want to get and is becoming more available in stores, the Philodendron Pink Princess. Not as much variegation as what there used to be once upon a time, because it's been cut and propagated so many times, so the stock of genetics within some of these plants aren't great, so you end up with a bit of a brown plant, so really not that exciting. And the Pink Princess will get its leaves stuck when it's trying to unfurl the leaf, more so than any other philodendron that I've ever seen, so probably not one to start off with. Now moving on to the next types of plant. So the next type of plant, and you might see a big mess of it next to me, is Monsteras. Now Monsteras generally tend to be ironclad, at least from what I've found. Out of a lot of these ones, a lot of these types of genuses of plants, and obviously there's always going to be exceptions, and I'll give you a couple of examples. These plants are definitely fighters. They are scramblers, they are fighters. Watering, they're not particularly fussy on. They can have some really interesting foliage. Obviously, in front of me, I've got a Monstera Adansonii with a whole bunch of janky support sticks, and it's growing wild, but I'm letting it do its thing. But there are obviously going to be some exceptions, and exceptions even then, they are exceptions by Monstera standards. So the one that I would say might be a bit easier, still not super easy to find in a lot of places, that people might want to pick up, is the Monstera albo, the Monstera with the white variegation. Now, lovely Monstera, it shares a lot of its traits with the deliciosa, so it can be hardy. The thing you need to watch out for that one specifically is that the white bits might go brown relatively quickly, depending if you've got the watering wrong, or if the humidity level isn't quite right, or maybe if the light level is too high as well. And also the albo variegated Monstera will go towards root rot, not more so than any other plants, but much faster than most other Monsteras. So my rule of thumb with the albo is, if you think it's ready to get watered, still wait for a few days and then water it, and you should be okay. But yeah, Monsteras, definitely ones that tend to be a bit more ironclad. And I think I'm going to round up with one last type of genus. Right, and it wouldn't be a video about forgiving houseplants without the humble Pothos, or the Epipremnum aureum. This one in front of me is the Marble Queen. There are things like the enjoy, the mandula pothos, and actually, interestingly enough, and again, I'll just quickly say the same thing I've said about most of the other ones that are actually forgiving houseplants. They're not as fussy about their watering. These ones can also tolerate some slightly lower light levels. They don't thrive, but they will tolerate it. But the thing about the Epipremnums, or at least the Pothos type Epipremnums, are things like the Implicium is slightly different, but the more patterned and creamy the variegation might be on the leaves, and this is an example of one that I wouldn't necessarily suggest as your first one. It might be your second, third, or fourth one, but maybe not your first one, is something like the Marble Queen, the Enjoy, the Mandula. The Mandula will go towards root rot like that if you get the watering wrong. But with a lot of the Pothos, and again, this is just my experience, correct me if you had different experiences down below, but with a lot of the Pothos, I will always let them go fully dry. If I've ever made the mistake of watering it when it's not fully dry, the soil, that's when I start getting problems like root rot. And even with some of the plants that I think I've got it right now, especially I'm thinking of the Mandula again, I've got it right now and I think I can water it a bit more frequently. It doesn't need to go like Sahara dry. It can just get done just before. No, it will still rot out relatively quickly. So, so just be careful with the ones that are highly variegated. There's a lot of white variegation. The yellow variegation, so not the Monstera, the Pothos, the golden Pothos with the yellow variegation on it, that one's fine. That's probably the hardiest one out there. So do what you will with that one. That's a good one to start with. But then move on after you've kind of got that one down and you're comfortable with what you're doing with that one, then go for some of these, but relatively easy genus of plants. So let me put this down and let's wrap up. Okay, some final thoughts based on all the different genuses that we've seen. And I know a lot of people might be sitting there going, oh yeah, we know everybody loves their Monsteras and everybody loves their Philodendrons, and why don't we get any more love for some of these other plants? And this might be me just being a bit brutal here. I think for the people that have been doing this for a while, even the ones that wanted to give other plants a fighting chance, and I'm fully aware that I haven't talking about Hoyas or wax plants or Dischidias. That's an entirely different topic on its own. But with the situation of growing plants in the care, and even with the people that wanted to give other types of plants the proper spotlight, a lot of us have ended up back with philodendrons and back with monsteras and back with some of the epipremnums. And that should tell you something. If it's taken us all that time to learn and we've all ended up back in the same few genuses, it's because they're easier to deal with. And even some of us that quite enjoy getting involved and doing all these different things and trying to keep everything happy, there is a point where you just need to let go and just go with the easier options, because you then get plants like this without having to stress and worry, and you just let them do their thing and they will be happy basically. But yeah, hopefully this was informational if nothing else. I'm going to love to see the comments at the bottom of this video. Apologies for how long this has gone on. I truly didn't think this was going to be a particularly long video, but I enjoy chatting with you all. So yeah, as always, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.